Attention, you're listening to the Todd Huff Radio Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk radio. Be advised that the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. Here's your conservative, but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, that is right, my friends. You tuned in to hour number 2 here on the Todd Huff Show. It's my pleasure to be here. We're continuing our conversation from the previous hour, although we're shifting gears a little bit here. I want to specifically this hour talk about something that Representative Mike Collins, Republican from Georgia, has done to illustrate the absurdity of what Senator Chris Van Hollen has done, and others now on the left flying down there to El Salvador for the photo op, the narrative, and all that's going on there, which we talked about last hour. Also have Stephen Miller going off and demanding reparations, which is not the type of reparations we typically hear about in this country. We've got Lisa Murkowski out there who's scared, very, very scared of President Trump. She said that at a town hall meeting, I guess, in Alaska. And we've got the future of the Democratic Party, which is very, very uncertain given what they're doing, but also given some survey data, which should be concerning to the left. I also ditched the hat. I didn't ditch the hat because I'm ashamed of the hat. I grew up as a kid. I live about 40 minutes, I'd say, north of Bloomington, Indiana, just outside of Indianapolis. And this is Indiana Hoosier country when it comes to sports. Now, some people will say that it's Purdue country. That isn't true. That's not true. It's fine if you're a Purdue fan, but there's really one community between us and Bloomington, and that would be Martinsville. We're about 20 minutes from Martinsville. They're about 20 minutes or so from Bloomington. So anyway, I wore the IU hat here, hoping for better days ahead for their basketball program. Their football program seems to be on the right track. Anyway, I ditched the hat. If you're watching on the video, I've gotten rid of the hat. I don't know. It just gets in the way sometimes. So before we get started, my friends, if you love seafood, I'm talking fresh, wild-caught seafood, Alaskan, American seafood, the best seafood America has to offer. Check out Kenai Fish. This is not just any seafood. It's wild-caught Alaskan seafood straight from the Kenai River, the Castleoff River, the Gulf of Alaska, not to be confused with the Gulf of America. This is different varieties, of course. We've got salmon, we've got sockeye, coho, and king salmon. We've got shellfish, king crab, snow crab, scallops, and more. We've got halibut. We've got a bunch of different seafood that you can check out from Kenai Fish. That, by the way, the website is kenaifish.com, and it's spelled Kenai, kenaifish.com. Again, kenaifish.com. You can go there and shop this fresh seafood. It gets delivered to you quickly, and it's in vacuum-sealed packages. So it's vacuum-sealed. It goes on an airplane, next day air, no middleman, no grocery stores, not sitting around on freezer shelves or anything like that. Straight to you. It's as fresh and as good as you can possibly imagine, even if you are in landlocked states, my friends, here in this great fruited plain. KenaiFish.com, KENAIFish.com. Again, KENAIFish.com. Promo code Todd, by the way, saves you 15% as a valued listener of the program. All right, so let's get to, this was in the story too, or excuse me, the stack, for a little bit of time. It was late last week or maybe over the weekend. LifeSet GOP rep trolls MS-13 supporting Dem Van Hollen with savage office makeover. So Representative Mike Collins, he's a Republican from the state of Georgia, publicly called out, the article says here, Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland, shares that state with, yes, sexy Martin O'Malley, over his advocacy for an El Salvadorian national who was identified as an MS-13 gang member and deported from the United States. The confrontation, which unfolded on social, we've talked about this, the confrontation, all this stuff. It's been in the news. It's been a narrative the left is trying to somehow use to get things going in their direction. They've been on the losing side of a lot here lately, and it doesn't mean that it's over by any stretch of the imagination. Republicans have to win elections. Republicans have to govern and legislate effectively. That's why they need the best medicine, the best remedy for making sure we don't have radical leftist leadership in this country again with any real power where they can actually be impacting the decisions in some of the ridiculous and insane ways that they do, is to implement as quickly and as thoroughly as much of Trump's agenda as possible so that it has time to have maximum return and people can experience as much of that, reasonable way, new way in comparison to the old stupid way we were doing things for the past 4 years, and compare and contrast and have their lives, some of these pressures that have been existing in their lives financially in particular, but also just with some of the chaos that's ensued from the leftist having their hands on the levers of power in this country, from the trans agenda to open borders to a whole list of other ridiculous things, and then compare and contrast that. That's what needs to happen here. But in the meantime, we've got governing to do. We've got legislating to do. We've got some court cases that hopefully we can win. So there's a lot of politicking and posturing and all that going on. That's why, of course, Chris Van Hollen is down in El Salvador. But Representative Mike Collins took a picture of the nameplate outside Chris Van Hollen's senator's office in the nation's capital, and he changed the state. I love this, by the way. It says Senator Chris Van Hollen, and it's got a line, and then it's got the state that you represent. So instead of saying Maryland, they've photoshopped this or whatever they did. It says El Salvador. And Rep. Collins posted this on X. Hey, Chris Van Hollen, I went ahead and changed your office plaque for you. He has that up there. So that's going on out there, this game of political posturing and that sort of stuff. This stuff does resonate with people out there, my friends. I referenced this earlier. I think I referenced it today just in passing, but I talked about this maybe for 2 minutes last week or earlier this week. I can't remember exactly when. I just want to hit this point before moving on from this and getting to what I really want to talk about here. On the 18th, an article posted at Politico.com, headline, oh boy, headline reads, Van Hollen's big moment, defending a constituent and defying Trump. The Maryland Democrat is in the national spotlight as he advocates for the return of his wrongfully deported constituent. I said this at the time. I referenced this maybe earlier in the program. I don't know what Politico thinks the definition of constituent is. You know, it's remarkable, really. You know, you might think that when we do the census every 10 years, that they're counting American citizens to do things primarily like determine how many senators and not number of senators, how many representatives each state gets, because that's based upon population. Turns out that they're counting illegal aliens in this number. And there's a fight. Why is there a fight over this? Why in the world are we allocating the number of representatives in Congress? Why does the number of illegal aliens have anything to do about this? Why does it have any calculation into how federal funding is allocated, which it does? These numbers, they're put into this calculation. So don't tell me there's not a direct cost. There's one example of a direct cost to the American taxpayer, my friends. But this Kilmar Abrego Garcia is not a constituent of Van Hollen's. Constituent implies that you can go and vote for Van Hollen. Constituent is someone that you represent and that you are trying to, gain their support or look out for their interests. Abrego Garcia is not even supposed to be in the country. What in the world is going on here, my friends? Only citizens should be counted for the... Listen, if you want to get a count of people who are, not here legally, I don't mind that, but to use them and to put them into the equation for determining the number of representatives or the amount of money that's spent federally, how that's allocated, is absolutely insane. Garcia is not a constituent of Van Hollen. This is ludicrous sort of stuff that we're talking about here, and this is what the Democrats have decided to get behind, my friends. So, what I really want to get to here as we talk about the wackiness of this whole thing, Stephen Miller was on, what show was he on here? He was on with, on Newsmax. Well, hold on here. My screen decided to jump way down here. It does this from time to time. He was on Newsmax talking with Rob Schmidt about what's happening here in this particular case. Rob Schmidt, well, actually, I'm just going to play this whole thing. I was just going to play Stephen Miller's response. But there are people that are calling for, and Rob Schmidt will mention this, calling for Garcia to receive reparations or some sort of a payment from the government, i.e. the taxpayer, i.e. you, for what's happened to him. They're calling for up to like $1 million a day or something like that. I'm going to play this, but listen to the response, more importantly here, from Stephen Miller, saying who should really be getting reparations here. Why we're not talking about this instead of giving Garcia reparations, Miller would say is absolutely inexcusable and reprehensible. Here's the full clip.
They've gone nuts, and the optics of it are just unbelievable. Sheldon Whitehouse is talking about seeking damages from the government for Abrego Garcia. He's talking about $1 million a day.
$1 million
he wants to fine the U.S. government for the deportation of an illegal alien who has been found in a couple different instances to be an MS-13 gang member. What on earth could possibly...
Where are the damages for Americans?
Exactly.
I don't know how much time I have here, but I mean, for the love of God, where are the damages for Americans? Where do I even begin? Where do I even start? We used to have a functioning public school system in this country. Then we had open borders. Now our schools are in chaos and disarray. We need hundreds of translators. Nobody's learning how to read or write. An entire generation of Americans, multiple generations, in fact, have been robbed of educational opportunities. Entire cities. Look at Los Angeles. Once a paradise of safety, security, and prosperity. Entire neighborhoods occupied and controlled by foreign gangs. Where do all the residents who've been displaced, who've been forced out of Los Angeles, where do they go to get their reparations? And then what about the victims of fentanyl poisoning brought in by Democrats' open border? Hundreds of thousands of moms and dads whose kids are dead and buried in the ground. Where do they go to get their reparations from the government? And then all the women who have been raped, who've been beaten, who've been murdered, all the dads who've been shot dead and aren't home, all the police officers who've been slain by illegal aliens in ambush attacks in the line of duty. Where do any of these people go? Where do any of their families go to get reparations? Or the 500,000 children that Joe Biden trafficked across the southern border and put into the hands of unvetted so-called sponsors? Do you know how many stories I could tell you of children that were trafficked across the border and raped because of the policies of Joe Biden? There aren't enough volumes that could fit into a library to calculate the carnage that has been inflicted by the Democrat Party's policy of open borders. We can spend the rest of our lives trying to document those harms. Where does our whole country go to get repaid for all of the wealth, all of the prosperity and security that has been stolen from us by decades of uncontrolled illegal mass migration? Because we all deserve reparations for what has been stolen from us. It is a tragedy that defies our ability to even describe it.
Preach, brother.
There you go. Very well said, by the way. His fuse has been lit on this particular issue. Sheldon Whitehouse wants $1 million a day for Kilmar Abrego Garcia. But to Stephen Miller's point, where do Americans go? Where do the Americans go who have been negatively impacted by what has happened in this country when it comes to illegal immigration? Where do they go? Where do they go if they've been harmed, physically harmed by people who weren't even supposed to be in this country? Should they not get reparations before Kilmar Abrego Garcia does? What about those people who lost family members? What about those people who saw their daughters murdered and assaulted by some of these evil, wicked people who've come across the border illegally? They shouldn't have been here in the first place, let alone be in a position to harm their young and beautiful and just young daughters who had the world at their fingertips, just beginning to experience the blessings of life, have that ripped away from them. Where do they go? Where do they go, Mr. Whitehouse, for their reparations? What about those who've had their jobs, lost their jobs to this? What about those who have been harmed by fentanyl that's come across the border illegally? What about those who were trafficked? What about the children whose lives have been just damaged beyond comprehension because of sex trafficking that was allowed to take place along our southern border? On and on we can go about this, as he did for quite some time, about 2 minutes there. But where do they go? Where are their reparations? Where is the concern about how these things have impacted them, about how they've impacted you? No, my friends, when we look to the folks on the left today, they don't seem to be very concerned about any of these things. In fact, if you are to say, like I just said, that there are violent, criminal, illegal aliens, they would say something along the lines of that being racist or xenophobic. They would say that that's an indictment against all illegal aliens, when I am not assigning that characteristic or that defining term to apply, in fact, to most of them. It doesn't apply to most of them. But we're not playing a game of odds here. This is the lives of human beings. This is what is right for our entire country. This nation should be focused on preventing the crimes that have happened, the crimes that have been committed, the heinous, wicked, evil crimes that their open borders 100% created. My friends, if you're not here in this country, you're not here to be able to create these heinous and wicked crimes. But yet they were, and the left is nowhere. When there are families who have lost loved ones who have been harmed by illegal aliens, there's crickets. It's so pathetic, too, because actually, because the narrative created by the left, if you insult a single person who is here illegally or who has a different skin color than you have, you're immediately branded as a racist. And so that's why they don't want to step into that arena. If you say something bad about someone who's not an American, someone who's Hispanic or a minority or whatever, that's portrayed as a broader racial problem that you have personally, you being a racist, you being a xenophobe, you hating people who are different from you, when turns out, knuckleheads in Washington, D.C., the part of this story that offends people like me and the people in this audience the most, Sheldon Whitehouse, is not the color of their skin, it's not their gender, it's none of that stuff. It's the things that's happening to Americans specifically at the hands of these folks that should not even be allowed in this country. Listen, it's one thing if people slip around the system, get through the defenses, that sort of thing here and there. But when there is an open gate that is wide open, that had been left wide open, that had no concern for the safety of American people, terrorists coming across that border, trafficking, drugs, violent criminals, you name it, coming across that border. People not just from Mexico, by the way, not just from Latin America and South America, from all over the world, coming across that southern border. Don't think for a moment that terrorists have not crossed that border and are now part of sleeper cells around this country. Don't think for one moment that that's not exactly what has happened. One of the many things that has happened along that border. Stephen Miller says, what about the reparations of those Americans who have suffered at the hands of our government? It was a complete, my friend, dereliction of duty in this previous administration. They refused to do what was right and necessary to protect you, to secure our borders, to enforce the law. We all paid for that. Where were calls? Where are calls for reparations? You know what's ironic is that people who are on the side of sense and judgment here, our default position is not to cry for reparations and handouts and that sort of thing. But if there's ever a case that it is absolutely justifiable, it is cases like this. Cases that say a particular person would be alive today if our government had only done what Trump has done in the past, 90 days or whatever. Illegal immigrant crossings are down 94, 97%, something like that year over year. Don't tell me that this was not something Biden could have done something about. It absolutely was. As Trump said in his State of the Union, yes, I know it wasn't technically a State of the Union, but for all intents and purposes, it was. When Trump says we were told that we had to have Congress pass legislation to secure our border, and it turns out all we needed was a new president, he hit the nail on the head. Putting America first means first and foremost, above everything else, is the safety and security of the American people from harms that can be afflicted from people that, from enemies foreign and domestic, but especially from people who all we have to do is enforce the laws and they won't be here to commit crimes. If there is ever a case that can be made that the government owes somebody anything, it's for people that have experienced that. And it's for a lot of American people who have suffered in a lot of ways from what's been inflicted on this country through our open borders. Stephen Miller with that brilliant little rant that he went on there. That's on our website. It's the article from wokespy.com. I have to take a time out, my friends. Sit tight. You're listening here to Conservative Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. I want to move along a little bit here, move past that soundbite, which is a fantastic clip soundbite from Stephen Miller. But it's still carrying on the theme, I guess. We don't do themes on this program, but it's inadvertently carrying on the theme here of what is wrong with today's Democratic Party. Headline here, LifeZet.com, new Yale polling is devastating to the future of the Democratic Party. A newly released survey from the Yale Youth Poll is drawing attention for its stark data showing a growing divide among young voters and a major setback for the future of the Democratic Party. So, the poll, conducted in early April and released this week, surveyed 4,100 registered voters nationwide, including a targeted oversample of 2025 voters between the ages of 18 and 29. Conducted by undergraduate researchers at Yale University, the survey measured voter sentiment across a range of political and cultural topics, including immigration, free speech, and public safety. Among the most notable findings, President Donald Trump now holds a net favorability of +7 among 18 to 21-year-old men, while Harris has fallen to a net of -48 in the same demographic. That's a 55-point gap between the two. Such a disparity is considered rare in national polling, particularly with younger voting groups. The survey's generational breakdown revealed a growing rift within Gen Z. Voters aged 22 to 29 still leaned slightly Democratic on the generic congressional ballot, favoring Democrats by 6.4 points. But listen to this, and this should have the Democrats absolutely, positively scared and shaking in their boots. However, those aged 18 to 21 leaned Republican by 11.7 points, marking a double-digit swing to the right among the youngest segment of eligible voters. On cultural and policy issues, younger men were more likely to support traditionally conservative positions. According to the survey, men aged 18 to 21 showed greater opposition to gender transition treatments for teenagers, stronger support for standardized testing in college admissions, and higher backing for stricter sentencing policies to address crime. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but the bottom line here is that the younger part of Gen Z is trending Republican. You know, one of the groups that the left has routinely, for as long as I've been following this or aware of this, one of the groups that the left holds on to dearly as kind of their key demographic is younger voters. This, by the way, if you want to see the left change their policy on things, let the data continue on this. I shared before when there's been a growing number of Hispanics that are trending toward Republican versus Democrat. And I shared before, the quickest way to ensure the Democrats want a secure southern border is to find out that the people coming across that border favor Republicans 80 to 20 or something like that. They would immediately find a reason to secure the border at that particular point in time. Now, one of the things that the left wants to do are things like automatic voter registration and all that sort of stuff. If you want to see the left change their tune really quickly, let these numbers continue to grow. Let the younger voters be 65 to 35 in favor of Republicans. You'll see the Democrats about face on these issues pretty quickly, my friends. The reason they talk about these things, push these things, is because it's politically advantageous for them to do so, and it won't be with younger voters turning Republican. And let's ask ourselves why. Why is this the case? And listen, this is just from what I know and what I discuss and what I read, what you've seen and thought about and just analyzed. I've got, my wife and I have he's 15. He'll be 16 here in a couple of months. So he's not quite in this demographic, but he's going to be able to vote in the next election. He goes with me on election night. I have gone, and for the past three presidential elections, I went to the Freedom 95 studios here in my home area, Franklin, Indianapolis, and broadcast live. He's been there 3 times. He's been there in 2016 when Trump won. He's been there in 2020 when Biden won, and he's been there in 2024, this past election, this past November. Brought a friend this time as well. So he's aware, he's following politics. You know, it's funny as he's aged. I don't want to talk too much about him. It might embarrass him, and I don't want to talk too much about some of these things. But one of the things I was talking with him about just yesterday, talking about certain behaviors. I said, would you date a girl? And I described a situation, and he shook his head no, and he responded. It's funny to hear him say this because I know you might not believe me when I say this, but we don't say these things to the kids. But he said, no, she's a liberal. So anyway, I think that younger generation, number one, they've experienced, especially those who might have gone to public school or who now are in college, they've experienced a lifetime of a lot of things that go against what these, especially the young men, but the young women too, what they've been taught, what they've experienced personally. I mean, they have had some of these insane, unhinged, radically leftist viewpoints and ideas shoved down their throats. If they're white students, they've been told to feel guilty for their race. If they're white men, they're told to sit down and shut up and not to have an opinion. Now, listen, I'm not saying this happens in every classroom. Certainly, there are good teachers that don't do these things, but it's been happening in a growing number of places, especially in the university setting. This stuff almost becomes the standard, if you will. It's sad to say, but it becomes the prototypical classroom, the prototypical environment. And they know that they're not racist. They know that they are not harboring these feelings and beliefs and ideas that these leftists are telling them that they are. Then they've been told that little Johnny, who they grew up with from kindergarten, is suddenly on a Tuesday in October and now a girl, and little Johnny's now Susie. And they say that doesn't make any sense. Of course it doesn't make any sense. You have to go through a liberal education system for that to even make any sense whatsoever. It doesn't make sense to those of us who are both feet rooted firmly in reality. And these young folks they've seen the unraveling of what they've been taught. They've experienced it. They've looked at the chaos and the insanity that ensues from this. They've seen it. They've also, I mean, you think about it. My son's almost 16. Trump's been on the political stage for 10 years. I mean, my son just knows a figure like Trump in the political sense. And, my son has an interest in it, I think, anyway, because, I mean, A, he's grown up in this household, but B, he just has an interest in it. I remember when he was a young man, we were sitting in our old house. I didn't even know he was watching. We were watching some news, and so they were talking about gun violence, and somebody blamed the actual gun. And my son, who would have been, little, 6, 7 years old, he was coloring or drawing or something. He looks up at me and said, I didn't even know he was listening again to this television show I was watching. He said, Dad, that's not true. The person using the gun's the one that did something wrong, not the gun. And I said, congratulations, son. You just figured out more than half of this country seems to know. So the point here is that these younger folks, things often are like a pendulum. And once something flows too far in one direction, it can swing back the other direction pretty dramatically in some cases. And I think that's what's happening here. They're losing the younger voters, and it's fantastic because that means the younger voters, in my estimation, are seeking truth. Really quickly here, I got to wrap up this segment. My friends, Freedom Marketplace is a place where you can go. We've built it here. We're growing it here at the Todd Huff Show, where you can go to find the advertisers you hear on this program or those who have their own listing. They don't have to advertise on the radio show or podcast, but they can get a listing if they agree to the terms, which basically say that they share your conservative values. They're pushing in the same direction you are politically. They're not going to support woke candidates or woke causes. Check it out, freedommarketplace.net. It's totally free for you to check out, freedommarketplace.net. I've got to take a time out, my friends. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Final segment of today's program. Goes so quickly. I know, my friends. By the way, before we get into this final segment, I want to play this soundbite from Lisa Murkowski. And by the way, I think we got to everything I wanted to get to today, which is a remarkable feat because we usually don't. So I want to get to this quickly. Before I do that, though, my friends, I know how I think about this issue. If I was given the choice to take 2 soft gels a day or spend hours in a doctor's office talking about cholesterol, I like my doctor even. I'm not interested in having those conversations if I don't have to. I know what I would choose if the options were A or B. I would choose the option of taking the soft gels, and that's what you can do with Solti. Solti is an all-natural, clinically proven, hear me say that, clinically proven, science has spoken, clinically proven way to lower cholesterol. It's done this for lots of people. It might be able to help you as well. So if you're concerned about your heart, your cholesterol, you've had a family history of these things, consider taking Solti. It's less expensive. It's not a drug. You don't require the time and the doctor's visits, all of that stuff. Again, not that I'm against that, but you don't have to do it. And I think that that's a better option, personally. So, all you got to do is go to Soltea.com, Soltea, to purchase your product. They come in a 3-month supply. You'll get 3 bottles. Use promo code Todd. You're going to save 50%, my friends. You're going to save half off your order and get free shipping to boot. Again, that's Soltea.com, Soltea. Promo code Todd is what gets you that discount. All right. Let us now, my friends. There's a video. The audio's not great. It looks like it's a town hall meeting. It's Rhino Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. She's asked a question here. She's asked a question about people who are scared of Trump and all this sort of stuff. I just want you to listen. I want you to listen to this because this is a leader. This is someone who's elected as a senator in the state of Alaska. I just want you to listen to this response. I might have to fill in some of the lower points, especially with the audience member, but I want you to listen to this question and response. Here it is, Lisa Murkowski, senator from the state of Alaska.
What do you have to say to people who are afraid? Or who
The question was, what do you have to say to people who are afraid? She continues.
represent people who are afraid? We are all afraid. Okay?
We are all afraid. Long pause.
It's quite a statement.
It's quite a statement, she said.
But we are,
Spit it out.
we're in a time and a place where I don't know, I certainly have not been here before.
She said, we're in a time and a place that I've certainly not been here before. With the way that she started that statement, I thought she was going to give us a Kamala-esque sort of statement. Something about the passage of time or something. But we're in a time and a place where she's not seen anything like this before. We're all afraid. We're all scared. We're all intimidated. She continues.
And I'll tell you, I'm oftentimes very anxious myself.
Very anxious.
About using my voice.
So speak up.
Because retaliation
is real, she says.
and that's not right.
What's the retaliation? What's the political consequences? What do you mean, retaliate? Words mean things. Retaliation, it's funny. If there's an intent there that we don't like or that we're trying to identify as negative, it's retaliation. If it's just the natural course of events, it's called consequences. Look, Ms. Murkowski, Senator Murkowski, if you are going to vote with the left, there are consequences for that politically. I don't mean threats. I don't want people retaliating against you. I don't want to see violence threatened against you. If that's what's happening, I mean, make it clear. Don't speak in ambiguous sorts of, just murky sentences. No pun intended, Murkowski. But don't do that. Make the statement. What was the threat? Why do you feel anxious? You feel anxious because you're being held accountable? Accountability is not a bad thing, but when you use the word retaliate, it seems like someone's intentionally trying to get even using whatever means necessary. Again, Trump will call you out. Is that retaliation or is that just accountability? Is that putting the appropriate amount of political pressure? Maybe it's putting a little too much political pressure. I don't know, but is it retaliation? What do you mean retaliation? You mean that you got to go back to your constituents and explain to them why you voted the way that you did? Is that retaliation, or is that simply being a representative in an elected government office? These are people who are supposed to be leaders. These are people, I know they're representatives. I'm not saying you have to look at them as, your spokesperson or your leader, but they're in a position where they can actually lead people in the right direction. They can do that. You need to be bold and courageous. What do you mean you're anxious? What do you mean that you're afraid to use your voice? I come on here every day and use my voice. What in the world are you talking about? You're hiding constantly. I don't understand why you would want to have the office if you don't want to take a position on things. Anyway, I'm out of time, my friends. Have a great day. Thank you so much for listening. SDG.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.